there, viewers, and welcome back to the Self-Made Auto Channel. This came outside. We are in, whoa baby, the 2013 Nissan. I think it's an Altima. We'll find out here. It's the bigger one. Customer complaint is that the money light is on and sometimes it runs rough. We need to know what submodel it is. It's all the same engine. We're going to pick SL. We're going to read the codes. And we'll just see. Now, I have noticed sometime being in this business long enough to know that sometimes people become hypersensitive to things. So, like if their engine light comes on, all of a sudden they have a complaint of engine light and weird smells and drives funny. But in this case, they're not lying. Looks like we have a PO 300 for random cylinder misfire, intake manifold runner position sensor, bank 1, and an intake V-Tim Cont V1 whatever that means. I don't know if you guys can see. So there's those items. So we do have misfires. All right, we do have some kind of intake manifold runner valve problem, an intake valve timing maybe. We're gonna, yeah, P0011, that's definitely gonna be something to do with the timing. I think what I want to do, I'm not super fluent on Nissans. I'll tell you, they're one of the Nissans and Fords are the two cars in the domestic Asian line that I don't see a lot of, and that is what my parking lot is full of today, Nissans and Fords. Oddly enough, we're going to pop into OBD2. I want to pull codes out of there to see if any of these are history codes or what's current, stuff like that. Sometimes that's easier for me to tell. It might be easier for you guys too if you're working on an unfamiliar car make. Just go into generic OBD2 data and look at something a little more familiar. So we're in here. First thing I always look at when I come into generic data is mode 1. Is the drive cycle, is the complete drive cycle ran? In this case it is. So that's good. Why is that important? Because when we're done with the car, you know, we fix whatever we see is currently broke. We give it back to the customer. All of a sudden, boop, money light's back on because, let's say, just ran the catalyst monitor, just ran the EVAP because somebody keeps hitting clear on their little code reader. So that's always important. So just takes 2 seconds. Take a peek at that. And then we're going to go ahead and check current pending permanent codes. So current code is intake cam position timing. Pending codes are PO 300 and the intake manifold runner position, and we have a permanent code there for the cam timing being over advanced. So that's good to know. Before we even get too far, let's see, it's got an oil change sticker on it. It's due at 58. It's 1,000. That's only about 500 miles overdue for a service. So let's just, before we even go on a rip, we will push the wrong button. We will check the oil just to be sure, and then we'll take her from there. Alright, oil is full and clean, like super clean for having that many miles on it. Just a tad over full, so not a big deal. Alright. So now we know it's full of oil. Before I go on my test drive, I'm going to pull up some data back into the OEM data. I'm going to look through the data list, see if I can see stuff that pertains to variable cam timing. Not super fluent with these engines, but we'll see. I don't know if they have variable cam timing on intake and exhaust. We'll see if we can find stuff for the intake manifold runner control valve, perhaps some misfire data. I'll see if I can pull the stuff up, some fuel trims, things like that, however they have that listed in here. Then I'll take it for a drive. Instead of trying to hold the camera and do this and text on my phone at the same time, I'll record it. And if I see anything that looks like it's relevant to us, I already did pop into freeze frame data to see when these codes stored. The engine was warm, so I'm not too concerned about letting it warm up and, you know, masking a problem. So hopefully we can duplicate it and see what the heck's going on. So I just got back from the test drive. I did notice on my test drive, I got to the area where I was going to turn around. I went to turn around and the car did stall. It seemed to run super smooth. had good power. Of course, it's got a CVT transmission, or at least it feels like it just stays cranked right up. When I pulled up to the stop sign coming back into town, RPMs went down real low. It, you know, chuckled and then, you know, regained itself again. But under load, it seems to work fine, and both times it started up fine. Now, I'm not 100% sure what data I should be looking at, so I think instead of you know, doing any type of guessing, I'm going to go back. We're going to grab codes and see what code setting criteria is, just like we would do with any other car make, and see if we can't take it from there and figure out, you know, what the heck's going on, and see how many different symptoms we have. And I'll probably call my customer. So currently, the only codes that are in it now on the OEM side are these two codes. The PO300 is not there. Like I say, it did seem to run smooth, so now we know a few things. So let's get started. Alright, so I just went to pull the car inside there. I was pulling up some service data, and it runs like garbage now. It won't even stay running. Yeah, just start, stall, you put it in gear, it chuggles and carries on. So whatever's happening, it's happening. So that's good. Keep it running here. It's running super rough. Put it in reverse. That's just the heat shield underneath it vibrating, but yeah, it's running really rough right now. All right, well, great. So I looked up the code, the P2017. I got built-in factory service data here on the Bosch, the ADS 625. In case anybody knows, it comes from Repair Source. It's a motor. I'm not 100% sure where they get it all from. Anyhow, so the P2017, the code criteria is intake manifold runner position sensor bank 1, switch circuit high. So I don't know, we'd have to look see how the sensor works. I assume maybe a 3-wire sensor, so that would indicate, it says excessively high voltage from the sensor sent to the ECM, so perhaps it could be shorted to the 5-volt reference. It could be open circuited if that's how it works. So we're going to find out where that thing lives. So that's one of our codes there. Give some testing procedures here. Yeah, position sensor harness. Yeah, so we'll look up on a wiring diagram, see where it is, and see what kind of sensor it is. So we should be able to easily test that. And then what did we have? We had the P. I think it was a 0011. I think it was for an over advanced intake cam. We'll see what that is. Camshaft timing over advanced or system performance. So we'll see what the code set criteria is there. The gap between the angle of the target and the phase control angle. Let's see, so camshaft position timing over advanced or system performance bank 1. DTC detection condition, there is a gap between the angle of target and phase control angle degrees. So I assume that means the camshaft timing commanded versus actual is off. Possible causes are crank sensor, cam sensor, intake valve control solenoid. So the solenoid that runs the cam phaser. Accumulated debris on the pickup sensor of the camshaft, timing chain, foreign matter caught in the oil groove for intake valve timing control. Hopefully this gives us some data PIDs that we need to look at. Like I said, I'm not super familiar with them, but we will figure that out. So first let's go look at this intake tuning valve or manifold, intake manifold runner control valve. I don't know if that can actually make an engine run crappy, but we will find out. So I'm going to pull up some wiring diagrams here and see what colors they are. Maybe it has something to do with the solenoid. I doubt it. Usually that's all ECM run, but we'll find out here. The boys are putting an engine in a Kia Forte right next to us, so we're trying to do what we can in here before we get out there and it's loud. Let's see. This is a sedan, right? Yeah, she's a 4-door. So we want engine control sedan. I'll find it on here and I'll show you guys. So looking at the diagram here, I see an intake manifold tuning valve motor. So it must be the motor is independent from the sensor. See if we can't find the sensor. Must be on a different diagram here. So I found it here. I was on the last diagram, the intake manifold runner control valve position sensor. But then oddly enough, in this diagram I also saw another intake manifold burner control valve motor. What the heck was I seeing? What did I just tell you guys? I think I was on diagram 3. Let's go back there. No, maybe it was diagram 2. Intake manifold tuning control valve motor right front of engine. Let's go back to that last diagram and see what the heck. Intake manifold runner control valve motor top rear of engine. Well, I guess in either case, it's not saying it's having a motor control problem, it's saying it's having a sensor problem, which being that it's stuck high, we're going to go right for the sensor, see where our wires are. The green wire looks like a ground, brown wire is power supply, and then the blue wire is going to be our sense voltage, so we know that. And then I'm curious to know if we have, let's see, how do we get out of here? We'll X out of here, and we will see if we have the ability to control this thing. Can we turn it on and off, you know, with the scan tool bidirectionally? And then perhaps we can see if we can find some data. They use a lot of acronyms that I'm not familiar with, so I might have to do some searching on that. I think half our diagnosis sometimes is research more than it is actual hands-on touching. Oops, I guess I better turn the key on. There we go, or push the button on. Okay, let's see. Other tests. Self-learn. Misfire. Okay, it does not look like, at least with this scan tool, it doesn't look like we can do anything. Well, we could try another scan tool, see if it's on there, or we can just go out and find it and see if we can't turn this thing on and off or see what the heck it's doing. So I found the valve, or not the valve, the sensor. It is back here on the back side of the intake. The other thing I noticed when I was back here too, it looks like it has a Dorman, or at least a made in China, intake solenoid, or a solenoid. I assume it's for the intake side. But I see it does have some dust on it, so it's not like it was just changed the other day. Now I unplugged the tuning valve, or the intake valve position sensor. I'm curious if somebody was back here and they were fiddling with this, if they had unplugged this, if it had set a code. But of course that was a pending code, so I'd like to think that's not the case. We're going to check 5-volt reference ground, or supply voltage ground and signal wire. Now I see the motor that drives it is over on this side of the intake, and it should be, figure down here, this little guy right here, that looks like the motor that runs it. Now that looks a little more difficult to get to. I took the air duct off that was right here in case we need to get to the ECM for anything. I've got our Pico. I'm going to take and see what we have for voltages, plug it back in, see what the signal wire looks like. So get your Pico up here on the screen for you guys. You can see it. We'll set this up. I don't know if that's a 5-volt or a 12-volt sensor. Get some more time here. Okay. So now we'll grab these. Let's see, the ground is, let's see, green, and brown is supposed to be supply voltage. So let's see if we can see that. Let's see. Green is ground, so it's going to be the one all the way to the left here. The center wire is your sense voltage. So let's see if we can very gingerly just touch the front of these pins. Touch that. It's supposed to be our supply. Look at the Pico. And it's probably be helpful if I had the key on. Alright, the key is on. So so we do have our 5 volts. Appears that we have a ground. Of course, this is open circuit testing. We're going to take and go right on the sense wire and go in the middle. So this is going to be the blue wire. I assume that's going to be 5 volts is my guess. And my guess is wrong. That is around 4 volts, okay? All right, so we will back probe sensor ground, and then we'll also back probe the signal wire, and then I'll plug it back in and see where it's at. So I've got it back probed in there, and we're holding about 730 millivolts. I'm going to fire up the Altel. I want to see if we have the ability to control that, so we can see if that sensor moves. It's certainly not high at this point. So I'll put Pico back up on the screen. I see the Altel does have the tumbler control valve, bidirectional control, so we're going to take and I think it'll toggle. Yep, so you can see it's on right there, off. Okay, let's have a look at it. Must be, oh, okay, yeah, let's get some more time on the screen here. Let's see. All right, so it's turning it on and off. Let me take and pause this. Well, let me stop. Pause this. Look at its transition point here. Looks like it turns on and off. Goes up to from about 800 millivolts up to 3.5 volts. So seems about right for a 3-wire sensor. Of course, now we are checking it at the sensor. This data has to make it back to the ECM. So that is something to keep in mind when you're doing this. ECM's commanding the motor. We know that works. We know we have our 5 volt, our ground, our wire, our signal wire there, but we can't say for sure, you know, is that signal making it back to the ECM? Probably is, because it has the 4 volts on it. I don't know if that's their bias that they normally run on it, to be honest with you. Being that this is not a current code, we're going to skip past this one for right now. We've done a couple quick basic checks. It doesn't seem to have a sensor that's open, that's staying high. So we're going to go on to the cam timing issue. I guess also, now that I know what I'm looking at, we can see our tumbler position. I didn't realize it was listed as tumbler, so I did some poking here. And that's what we're at, exactly 7.3 volts on the scope. That's what the ECM's seeing. We'll turn it on. 3.6 volts there, or 3.48. And we are seeing, well, 3.48 now on the Pico. So I suppose this is something we could monitor while we drive it, now that we see that it, you know, that I know what I'm looking at scan data wise. So sometimes it does take a little discovery as far as what you're looking at. I'm going to assume the high voltage code. Now if we unplug that, I'm going to assume our position sensor does go up to the 4 volts, so I've got to get my probes out. So we'll unplug that and look at that, and I can only imagine that would set the high code, or the sensor signal high. Let's see if I can get down to it to unplug it again here. It's kind of a piss spot to get to. There we go. All right, so it's unplugged, and is at 5.12 volts. I thought we were reading like 4. I could be wrong, but I would assume that would set the high code, the open circuit. So I just want to double check myself on the scan tool. Open circuit voltage is 5 volts. When I plug into it with the Pico, it does pull it down. So I'm just probed into it there. The Pico is reading just a smidge over 4 volts, and so isn't the scan tool with the Pico plugged into it. So it does pull that signal down ever so slightly. So that's why we're seeing what we see, because now if I take and unplug the Pico, we can see we go back up to the 5 volts. So I guess that explains that. Curiosity more than anything, folks. All right, folks, so that's where we're at with that sensor. Pretty satisfied with that right now. Like I said, we're gonna move on. I gotta take a break a minute. Gotta help the boys do some torch work to get this engine out. We gotta cut some exhaust stuff. So I'm gonna do that. We'll come back, we'll look at the intake timing see what's going on there. Low mileage engine. I'm not thinking that there is an actual physical timing problem, but perhaps something to do with that aftermarket phaser or that solenoid. I don't know. We're going to figure it out. All right. We're back on this. Torching is done. Time has passed. I'm going to pull your Pico up there. Now what you're seeing on your screen is on the intake control solenoid. So the one that they replaced is not the one that controls the intake cam. That's an intermittent lock solenoid of some sort. I haven't done a lot of reading on that. We want to look at the one that actually is going to control the cam timing. I'm going to get up here on this screen. Hopefully I can have them both. I wish I had some kind of screen recorder on here, but I don't. We're going to start it up. We're going to see what our intake cam timing is, command versus actual. We're going to see if we have control going to the solenoid. So I am in the control side of that. So key on, engine off. We got battery power going into it, battery power coming out of it. Now it's not pulling it to ground because the ECM's not commanding it on. So let's start up the car. Right there, it just toggled it. Oh, and it just turned it off. So on the scan data, nothing is happening, okay? Right now our intake timing is at 0, and the car seems to run well. Let me give her a couple rev ups there, give her a little blurb right there. Trying to see the Pico out there under the hood. So let's try to control it up. Okay, we can see it starting the duty cycle. On the screen out there, I got my time base that's a little slow, but it's pulling that signal to ground. It should be changing our cam timing. Let me hold it. About 2,000 RPMs here. And our intake cam is not moving at all. Let's give her a little more juice here. Oh, it moved about a half a degree there. Okay, that's interesting. Let's bring her back down. Take her back to 0 here. -1, 0. It should turn that solenoid off, and it did. Okay, that's interesting. So the solenoid is receiving the command. Boy, I wish I could get a current clamp on it, but where this thing is, I can't. Because then we could tell if this thing was mechanically stuck. Obviously it's not open circuited, because we wouldn't have anything displayed on our scope. We wouldn't have any voltage going through it. Back to 0. So it does, the ECM does see the command, but you know, right now the car is running good, so it makes me wonder if that thing is mechanically sticking. Is it stuck in its neutral position right now, or its closed position, I guess we'll call it. And then at some point it sticks open where the car runs like garbage. Because the car is pretty well warmed up. And the ECM's sending it its command on its own. Yeah, when we go full throttle, it does turn it on. But it is not functioning. So I would say, based on what we've seen, we can justify taking it out to see if it's mechanically stuck, or perhaps we can get on it with a power probe and see if we can hear it click. Usually you can, you know, apply power to them and they're pretty distinct sound, you know, clunk, clunk, you'll hear them click open and closed. Because I don't think that we can do this with the engine off as far as using this tool. I know when we went to intake valve timing assignment angle, it has to be running. And I don't see any other tests there, and I don't think there was any in special functions. No, not that I see. So that's ignition timing. So I think the only way we could do it is manually. So I was able to get a jumper wire in between the connector and, you know, where it hooks on the engine. So I did put a current clamp on it. It doesn't give me as much information as I hoped it would. So we'll take and turn it on here. and you can see the duty cycle is so high that, let me just pause this and back up, that the current turns on and stays steady. Now I guess we can look at its turn on right here, and it seems to be pretty gradual. It doesn't shoot right up like it's shorted. Of course I'd have to see a known good one, but just something that's kind of in the back of my mind I wanted to kind of look at here, and then we can take, and we'll turn it off. We should see it turn off, and it does. So that's interesting. I don't think it's mechanically moving. All right, folks, so here's where we're at with it. It doesn't appear that it can control cam timing. Now, I've seen those two solenoids. We got the made in China one that's in there, you know, probably a Dorman one, I would guess. And then we have the one that we're testing, which is actually down low, and this is the intake variable valve timing control solenoid. When I look in service data, as far as, you know, generating this code, it doesn't really say anything about the other solenoid. I look up theory and operation, how the system works. It appears, the best that I can tell by my ability to read, is that that other solenoid is quite important. It is the one that actually locks the camshaft, and it controls two lock pins in the cam sprocket itself. So it has several theory and operations of how it works depending on engine temperature and oil temperature when it completely unlocks and allows control of the other solenoid that we're testing. So my question to myself is, I said, self, if that lock solenoid is not functioning, let's say that's not opening, it's not releasing the lock pins in this phaser on the end of the cam, would it stand to reason that everything we're checking is kind of ridiculous? Because with the pins locked, it can't move. The fact that it's aftermarket, you know, Chinese solenoid, which we see, you know, a high failure rate with, not particularly on Nissan's going to work on, but on other, you know, domestics and stuff, you know, we never ever use a Dorman cam phaser, because, you know, or solenoid, because, you know, it's just not going to work, or it's going to fail, or it's going to stick. And that's what I'm wondering is, you know, is that thing not functioning? Is it sticking open, releasing the lock when it's supposed to be locked? Or in this case, maybe keeping it locked when it's supposed to be unlocked. I don't know. Let's find out. Got our Pico hooked up to the lock, intermediate lock. The best I can read, which isn't great, the best I can tell with the literature, that when the engine's warm above 60 degrees Celsius, which we should be, we're almost operating temperature, it doesn't activate the solenoid. Once the engine starts, it doesn't activate. The oil pressure at that point goes through that solenoid to unlock the pins and allows control of the variable valve timing. That's how I read it. I hope I'm right. So I'm gonna, we got the Pico here so you guys can see that. We're gonna go back into the bidirectional control, and the best I could tell, we shouldn't see any change from it. And on the screen, I think it's gonna be the green trace is our power going to it. So let me shut the engine back off here. That should kill the power on that one. Okay, so our blue trace is the variable valve timing solenoid. The red trace is the power going to it, or the control side of it rather. I'll turn the key back on. The green trace is the control side of the lock, and the yellow trace is the current going into that lock. We're gonna fire it up here. Okay, so it is activating the lock, and then it seems to turn it off. Perhaps that's a checks and balance system of some sort, to perhaps lock it during the cranking position or during the initial startup. But now with it being unactivated, because if it was activated, we'd have current flow and we'd see our voltage drop. I can only assume that if that solenoid works, that it is indeed unlocking. So we're going to go back in here. We're going to activate the variable valve timing. Now this is, let's see, we'll go up here. Okay, so we can see it's activated on the screen. We can see the lock solenoid does nothing. You know, the ECM's not commanding it, so I assume what I read is correct. Now I'm going to turn it back off, and it turns off. We turn it back on, turn it back off, and it turns off. So that's interesting. We'll shut it down, and then everything should turn off. It does some kind of check there or something afterwards. So at this point, I could only assume, based on what we see, either we have a couple problems. We have a lock solenoid that is not functioning. that is receiving its control of some sort. It's not functioning. It's not actually unlocking. Okay, so let's say it's stuck, perhaps. We could have a variable valve timing. Let's say it is unlocking, but the variable valve timing is all wonky and is not functioning as it should. Or the cam phaser on the side of the engine, on the camshaft sprocket itself is no good. It's bleeding pressure. It won't release its lock pins, something like that. This is a low mileage car. This car is at 59,000, so it's got 60K on it. Pretty low mileage. Oil looks clean. I think the car's been well maintained. Just judging by the looks of it, I know the guy who owns it. It appears to be within service spec. He's just a little bit overdue for an oil change. Not horrendous. At this point, because we have an aftermarket solenoid in that cam lock, I would like to get that before I even take it out, because I don't want the car disabled here in my bay. So I'm going to call him. I'm going to get permission to take that lock solenoid out from Nissan. I'm going to order both of those solenoids. I want to start first with that lock solenoid. It's aftermarket. We'll take it out. Who knows? Perhaps it's not, pushing oil pressure in the correct path to unlock those pins. That we don't know. All we can do is check control to it. I might leave my stuff hooked up so I can fiddle with this more when it's cold, because supposedly it has a different strategy when it's cold and how long it keeps that lock pin engaged to stop the variable valve timing from working. I'll see if I can bring up the description operation for you on the screen so you guys can read through that. It was pretty interesting, and that's the best I can do without having a known good car to check to see. That's the best I can do, folks. And we're going to leave it at that. So I'm sure we'll probably get the chance to fix this car. Been losing track of time today. It's darn near 2 o'clock already. Back and forth with other things, but I'm going to see if I can get the parts, get them here tomorrow. Hopefully pick up back on this video soon when we get the job, and we'll see what we see. So anyhow, go down there, wait for part 2. To get the notification, click the notifications. After you click subscribe and ring the bell and all that stuff. Just remember, viewers, if I can do it, you can do it. Thanks for watching.